I've always believed that music reveals more about people than words ever could. You can tell everything about a person from the way they touch a piano key, how gently they begin, how confidently they resolve, and whether they ever return to the same note twice. That belief guided my entire career. For 35 years, I taught music history at Juilliard, lecturing about Debussy, Ravel, Chopin, the composers who painted emotions instead of merely arranging notes. And after I retired, I found peace in the simple rhythm of tuning pianos. No students, no deadlines, just keys and silence. It let me stay close to music without being swallowed by it. My daughter Sarah used to tease me about that. Dad, she'd say, you've spent a lifetime surrounded by prodigies, and now you're the man who fixes their instruments. I always smiled and said, yes, sweetheart. I suppose I'm just making sure they stay in tune. But the truth is, I'd grown comfortable in the background, until the night my son-in-law, Griffin Montgomery, challenged me in front of an entire gallery of New York's art elite. That night, everything changed. It started with an invitation. Elena Vasquez, the owner of a high-end contemporary gallery in Manhattan, was hosting an exhibition of Griffin's newest collection. He's an art dealer, charming, intelligent, but fiercely proud. He has this habit of explaining the meaning of every brushstroke, as if he alone can see the secret beneath the paint. I'd planned to attend quietly, to offer my congratulations, sip a glass of champagne, and maybe sneak out before the critics arrived. But I brought a gift that night, something I thought would mean the world to him. It was a worn leather folder, holding a manuscript I'd spent 3 years authenticating. A handwritten piano composition titled Reverie, Poor Sophie, dated 1894, signed by Claude Debussy. At least, that's what I believed. To me, it wasn't just a relic of musical history. It was a connection to the past, to beauty, and most painfully, to someone Griffin and I had both lost. His sister, Sophie. When I arrived, the gallery was glowing with that sort of artificial warmth you can only find in expensive spaces. Walls painted bone white, paintings that looked like silence given color, and people who spoke in whispers that still somehow demanded attention. Griffin was in his element. Dark suit, confident smile, talking about emotional geometry and spatial rebellion. He could turn anything into art, even arrogance. When he saw me, he smiled politely. "Ree," he said, "you made it." He always called me Ree instead of Dad. A quiet boundary between the academic father-in-law and the self-made art dealer. "Wouldn't miss it," I told him, handing him the small folder I'd carried all evening. "A little something I found for you. Thought you might appreciate it." He took it, curiosity flickering across his face. When he opened the folder, the faint scent of old paper and ink drifted out. "What's this?" he asked. "Take a look," I said. "It's a manuscript, something special." Griffin scanned the page, reading aloud the faded title. Claude Debussy, Reverie pour Sophie. He frowned. "Debussy? You mean Debussy?" "Yes," I said softly. "Claude Debussy. That's his signature." He chuckled, quiet at first, then louder. "Debussy never wrote a piece called Reverie pour Sophie, Ree. I think you've been conned." A few nearby guests turned their heads. Griffin loved an audience. "I'm serious," he said. "This is a forgery. Look at the paper texture, too new. And the ink, probably printed, not written." The words stung more than I wanted to admit. I'd spent 3 years and $12,000 authenticating that manuscript. To me, it was genuine. To him, it was a joke. Dr. Webb, a respected music historian, overheard the exchange. He stepped closer, intrigued. "What's the composer listed on this piece?" he asked. Griffin answered before I could. "Claude Debussy, Rêverie, pour Sophie, 1894. Dr. Webb's eyebrows rose. "Daydream for Sophie. I've never heard of that one." "Exactly," Griffin said, smirking. "Because it doesn't exist." But Dr. Webb shook his head. "Not necessarily. Debussy wrote dozens of small pieces that were never published. Gifts for students or patrons. Many are lost to history." Griffin's smile faltered. "Are you suggesting this could be real?" "I'm suggesting Dr. Webb replied evenly that dismissing it without proper examination would be premature. The crowd around us had gone still. You could feel the tension like electricity. Griffin's confidence was cracking. His art world authority was being challenged. Not by me, but by someone with actual expertise. Then Elena Vasquez appeared, sensing trouble. "Griffin," she said quietly, "maybe we should continue this privately." But Griffin was too deep in now. His pride had taken control. "Elena, it's fine," he said, voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "I think it's important that people understand how to evaluate authenticity claims." He held the manuscript up for the crowd. "This is a perfect example of wishful thinking becoming expensive delusion. My father-in-law believes he owns a rare Debussy manuscript. In reality, it's probably worth $20 at best." Laughter rippled through the gallery. He didn't mean to humiliate me, but he did. And standing there, listening to my son-in-law mock me in front of 100 strangers, I realized this wasn't about a piece of paper. It was about what he thought of me. An old man, a piano tuner, someone beneath him. I took a slow breath. Then I said quietly, "Before you continue, Griffin, may I ask a question?" Something in my tone made the room go silent. He hesitated. "Sure, Ree. Go ahead. You said real manuscripts come with documentation. From institutions like the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, correct?" "Yes." "And valuations from auction houses like Sotheby's?" "Of course. And that Debussy never wrote anything titled Reverie, poor Sophie." "Right." I nodded thoughtfully. "Interesting. You seem very certain for someone who specializes in visual art, not music." Griffin blinked. "Excuse me. I'm just curious," I continued. "Where did you study French musical history? Which professors? Which texts?" He hesitated. "I'm self-taught in that area." "Ah, then you're basing your claim on the standard catalogs of Debussy's works, I assume." "Obviously." Dr. Webb interjected quietly. "Actually, there's no single comprehensive catalog of Debussy's unpublished works. The Debussy Foundation's still compiling one." Griffin glared at him. "Fine, but this manuscript has no documentation." "You're absolutely right," I said, pulling a folder from my jacket pocket, "which is why I brought this." I opened it, revealing a stack of embossed papers. Even from a distance, the letterheads were unmistakable. Bibliothèque Nationale de France, Sotheby's, and the Debussy Foundation. Griffin's color drained. "What is that?" "The documentation you said was necessary," I replied. "Authentication certificate from the Bibliothèque Nationale. Reference number BNF 202-40847. Sotheby's Valuation Assessment, March 2024. And verification from the Debussy Foundation confirming authenticity." Dr. Webb took the documents, eyes widening as he read. "These are real," he said softly. "Completely legitimate." The gallery fell utterly silent. Griffin's voice was faint. "How did you—" "The question, Griffin," I interrupted gently, "is not how I obtained authentication. It's why you were so certain I couldn't." Elena stepped forward, eyes wide. "Professor Cooper," she whispered suddenly. "You're Professor Raymond Cooper?" All heads turned. "I took your music and society seminar at Columbia," she said. The name sank in around the room. Whispers spread like fire. Griffin's mouth opened. "You're a professor?" "At Juilliard." I said quietly. "For 35 years. He stared at me like he'd seen a ghost. "But you tune pianos." "I've seen your van." I smiled. "I tune pianos because I enjoy staying close to the instruments. It's a hobby, not a profession." The crowd murmured, realization washing through them. The man they just watched be publicly humiliated was a world-renowned expert on French Impressionist composers. Griffin's humiliation deepened, but so did something else. Recognition. Because if I was who Elena said I was, then I knew his sister's name wasn't just coincidence. I knew about Sophie, and suddenly, the manuscript in his hands felt very different. He tried to recover. "This doesn't make sense," he said, forcing composure. "If you were a Juilliard professor, why didn't you ever tell me? Why pretend to be a piano tuner?" I met his gaze. "You never asked, but Sarah must have known." I turned to my daughter. Sarah, did you know? She looked stunned. No, Dad. You always just said you worked with pianos. Griffin seized the moment. So you lied? To your own daughter? I never lied, I said calmly. I do work with pianos. I just didn't specify in what capacity. That's semantics, Griffin snapped. Why hide something like that? Why pretend to be someone you're not? The crowd murmured. His logic sounded reasonable. Griffin, Elena, tried to intervene. Maybe this isn't the place. No, he interrupted. We deserve an explanation. He turned to the audience again, his performer instincts taking over. Think about it. A retired professor pretending to be a piano tuner, showing up at my gallery with $1 million manuscript. It's bizarre. Why hide that for years? He was regaining control of the room, redirecting suspicion away from himself. And another thing, he continued, if Professor Cooper really is an expert, why let me embarrass myself before revealing it? Why wait until now? Dr. Webb nodded slowly. That is an interesting question. Griffin's voice grew stronger. It's like he was setting me up, waiting for me to make mistakes, so he could humiliate me publicly. People were nodding again. Griffin was reclaiming sympathy. He wasn't finished. This isn't about music, he said, voice trembling now. This is about cruelty, about revenge. He turned toward me. My sister died 3 years ago, Professor. Sophie. Music was her life, and losing her destroyed me. You knew that, and you bring this manuscript, of all things, to humiliate me in front of everyone. The words hit hard. Grief, anger, pain. The gallery had gone silent. He looked at me, eyes wet. This isn't generosity, he said. It's cruelty. And in that moment, every head turned toward me again, waiting to see if I really was the villain he just described. The room was silent. Every whisper, every breath felt amplified against the walls of that perfect, polished gallery. And there I stood, an old man holding history in his hands, accused of cruelty by the man who just tried to humiliate me. I didn't speak right away. I let the quiet stretch until the air itself felt fragile. Then softly I said, You're right, Griffin. A murmur rippled through the crowd. I did wait until tonight. And yes, perhaps I could have told you the truth sooner. But what I wanted wasn't humiliation. It was understanding. He frowned. Understanding what? Understanding the difference, I said, between arrogance and grief. He blinked, confused. I could see him trying to process the words. But before he could respond, I reached into the folder again and pulled out a small, faded photograph. It was Sophie, laughing, her fingers poised above the piano keys. The sunlight of a Paris morning spilling through the curtains behind her. The crowd leaned closer. Even Elena gasped quietly. I handed the photograph to Griffin. She sent me that, I said softly, the summer before she died. He stared at it, his face pale. Where did you get this? She mailed it to me, I said, along with a short letter. She'd just begun teaching music theory to underprivileged children in Montmartre. Said she'd never felt more alive, that she was finally doing something meaningful, something you once promised you'd both do together. Griffin's lips parted. She told you that? Yes, I said quietly. She told me everything. The color drained from his face. And then, almost in a whisper, he asked, What did she say? I took a breath. She said she wished you could see her the way she saw herself. Not as a failure, not as someone who walked away from the art world, but as someone finally free of its vanity. Griffin's voice broke. That's not fair. No, I said it's not. And it's why I brought this piece tonight. I turned back to the crowd. This manuscript, I said, lifting reverie, poor Sophie, is real, but not because of its ink or its paper or the value Sotheby's assigns to it. It's real because of what it represents. I looked at Griffin again. Sophie discovered this piece in an old Parisian archive. She wrote to me about it 3 months before she died. She said it spoke to her, that it felt like Debussy had written it for her soul. After she passed, I used what little influence I had to locate and preserve it in her name. I stepped closer. Reverie, poor Sophie, was never meant to shame you, Griffin. It was meant to remind you that not all art belongs on walls. Some of it belongs in the quiet corners of our hearts, where love and regret coexist. His eyes were glassy. He tried to speak, but no words came. And then, for the first time since I'd known him, Griffin Montgomery looked small. Not weak, not pitiful, just human. Elena broke the silence. "Professor Cooper," she said softly, would you play it?" The crowd murmured in agreement. I hesitated, then nodded. They rolled out a baby grand piano from the corner of the gallery. Its lid gleamed beneath the soft lights. I sat down, adjusted the bench, and ran my fingers gently across the keys. It had been years since I'd played in public. But tonight wasn't about performance. It was about memory. I opened the manuscript. The notes stared back, simple, graceful, full of restraint. Debussy's handwriting danced across the page, like the breath of someone who still believed in beauty. And then I began to play. The first chord filled the air like a sigh. Soft, melancholic, a melody that felt like sunlight filtered through old lace. Each phrase rose and fell like Sophie's laughter, light and unguarded, before descending into a tenderness that was almost unbearable. I could feel her presence, not as a ghost, but as warmth in my chest, a whisper in the spaces between notes. The room was utterly still. Even the glasses of champagne seemed to shimmer more quietly. When the final chord faded into silence, I didn't look up right away. But when I did, I saw tears on more faces than I could count. Even Griffin. He stood there, hands trembling, his expression shattered and raw. He looked like a man seeing the world clearly for the first time. After the applause subsided, he walked toward me slowly, still holding Sophie's photograph. "I didn't know," he said hoarsely. "I didn't know you two were in touch. She wanted it that way," I said gently. "She didn't want you to worry about her. She thought she could fix things herself. But when she realized she couldn't, she wrote to me. And after she passed, I promised her one thing." He swallowed hard. "What promise?" "That I'd help you see her again. Not through guilt, but through music." He looked down at the manuscript, then at me. Then, quietly, he whispered, "I'm sorry." "I know," I said, and I meant it. For a moment, we just stood there, two men bound by the same loss. The same woman we both loved differently. Then I placed a hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to be the man who sells art, Griffin. You can still be the man who understands it." He nodded slowly. The arrogance was gone. In its place, humility. In the weeks that followed, everything shifted. The gallery exhibition became something else entirely. Elena renamed it Reverie for Sophie. Every sales proceeds went toward a new scholarship. For young musicians who couldn't afford conservatory tuition, Griffin handled the logistics himself. He met with students, interviewed families, and, for the first time in years, his voice carried sincerity instead of showmanship. Sometimes he'd stop by my workshop. He'd sit quietly as I tuned a piano, listening to the faint hum of vibrating strings. Once, he even asked me to teach him. I handed him a tuning fork and said, "Lesson 1. Music begins with listening, not playing." He laughed softly, but I saw in his eyes that he understood. A few months later, Elena invited me back to the gallery for one final event, the unveiling of a new installation. When I arrived, I saw it immediately. At the center of the room stood a glass display case. Inside it, the original Reverie Poor Sophie manuscript, and next to it, a bronze plaque that read, "Dedicated to Sophie Montgomery, 1989 to 2022, whose laughter became music, and whose music became memory." I stood there for a long time. Then I saw Griffin approach, hands in his pockets. He looked older, wiser, somehow. "She deserves this," he said quietly. "Yes," I replied. "She does." He smiled faintly. "I've been thinking," he said, "about what you said that night, about art belonging in the heart. Maybe that's what I've been missing all along." I looked at him. Maybe that's what we both were missing. He nodded, then turned toward the small stage at the end of the room. "Will you do the honors?" I blinked. "Do what?" He smiled. "Play it again." And so I did. This time, I didn't feel nervous. Didn't feel the weight of grief or pride. Just peace. The notes flowed easily, like a river remembering its course. I could almost hear Sophie humming along, off-key as always, but full of joy. When the final chord faded, the room erupted in applause. Not the polite kind of an art gallery, but the heartfelt kind that rises from somewhere deep inside. Griffin stood beside me, clapping the hardest. And when the applause finally subsided, he leaned over and whispered, "Thank you, Dad." For the first time, he said it without hesitation. That night, as I walked home through the quiet Manhattan streets, I thought about the strange symmetry of life. How grief can twist into pride. How pride can soften into humility. And how forgiveness sometimes sounds a lot like music. I passed by a street performer, a young woman playing a cheap keyboard. The melody was clumsy but honest. She smiled when I dropped a bill in her open case. "What are you playing?" I asked. She shrugged. "Something I made up." I smiled. "Keep making it up." She grinned. "Thanks, mister." As I walked away, I could still hear her tune echoing down the block. It wasn't perfect, but it was alive. And for the first time in years, I realized. So as about a year later, Reverie pour Sophie was officially archived in the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, cataloged as one of Debussy's rediscovered private compositions. The scholarship fund it inspired has already sent 6 young musicians to conservatories across Europe. One of them wrote me a letter last spring. She said, "When I play, I think of Sophie. I imagine her smiling in the front row. And every time I sit at a piano now, I start with one simple ritual, a soft chord, a breath, and a whisper to the memory of the girl who taught me that even silence can sing." Because in the end, revenge wasn't what this story was ever about. It was about redemption and about finding harmony again, not in music, but in love.